Hello, my name is Rena Lyons and I am delighted to be presenting today about adapting the Global Tales protocol for use around the world. And in this presentation, we're going to explore experiences of involvement in the project. The Global Tales project, as Mary and Marlene have described, is a project which is about investigating methods for eliciting and analysing children's personal event narratives with the ultimate aim of developing tools and approaches to support interventions for this important skill in children with significant challenges in their learning, including children with language disorders. This is truly a global project with researchers from across the world participating in adapting and using this protocol in respective countries. So the aim of this part of the study was to obtain feedback from researchers regarding the process of adapting and using the protocol in countries across the world. So each participant recruited children, 10-year-old children, typically developing children in their countries, and used the protocol. We were specifically interested in how researchers translated the protocol, generated narratives using the prompts, and how they analysed the stories. We wanted to investigate researchers' views on whether or not the protocol was culturally appropriate in their respective countries, and to explore barriers and facilitators to using the protocol, as well as recommendations for next steps. So the method that best aligned with addressing our objectives was qualitative research. And qualitative research is an interpretive approach to data collection and analysis that's concerned with how people with the meanings people attach to their experiences of the social world and how people make sense of that world. It's useful in implementation science, so looking at the context and systems within which new approaches, assessments and interventions can be implemented, and qualitative research can address the hows and the whys of implementation. So from a sampling point of view, we used purposeful sampling, and in qualitative research, purposeful sampling means that you look for participants who are best suited, I suppose, to or had the experience of a phenomenon that you're interested in. And in this case, we were interested in recruiting participants who either had plans to collect and analyse data from a sample of 10-year-old children in their countries, or participants who had already collected and analysed personal narratives. 17 participants participated in this study from 12 countries, and those countries included Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Croatia, Cyprus, Greece, Iceland, Israel, New Zealand, Sweden, Taiwan, and the USA. We used semi-structured interviews to collect the data, and semi-structured interviews means that we had an interview guide. So 3 members of the team developed the interview guide that addressed or mapped onto our objectives, and we also the interviews then were conducted by Nikki Turkby, who's a researcher and a speech language therapist in New Zealand, and the interviews were conducted by Zoom. Because English wasn't the first language of many of the participants, we gave the participants the interview guide in advance of the interview. We also followed the COREC guidelines for reporting on qualitative studies. And because reflexivity is such an important part of qualitative research, we critically reflected on our own assumptions and biases and ways in which they may influence the data collection and analysis processes. So for example, we all had positive views and held positive outlook regarding the Global Tales project. So it was important that we designed questions and included questions that were that could target, I suppose, both positive and negative experiences. So we really wanted to get people's honest reflections on their involvement in the project. We used content analysis for the data analysis, and content analysis is a systematic and objective means of describing and quantifying phenomena. And the output of a content analysis are categories and subcategories. The first step in the process was a deductive approach. So we used the topics from the interviews as categories in NVivo, which is a software package that we used to assist with the analysis of the data. And then we used an inductive approach, so looked at the transcripts to see, and we identified subcategories then within those overall categories. We then went through a process of refining, merging, reviewing the categories and subcategories to eventually come up with 4 categories, each with their own subcategories. We also used member checking, so we invited the participants to review the analysis and check whether or not the analysis reflected their experiences. And this is very important because the researcher is analysing the participants' intended meanings. And again, particularly where English was not the first language of all of the participants, it was important to check that the interpretations matched their intended meaning. So some participants came back with clarifications, some accuracy, they were checked for accuracy, there were some corrections, and some participants also added context to further elaborate or explain the point they wanted to make. So in terms of the findings, we had 4 overall categories. So overall experiences of involvement in the project, experiences of translation, experiences of transcribing and analysis, and experiences of generating the data. So I'm going to go through each of those now individually and elaborate a bit further. So in terms of overall involvement in the project, so the experience for all of the participants was very positive. They really enjoy being part of an international project, and they ensured that they followed the protocol to ensure consistency, and they really valued the practical support that they received about the protocol. So for example, there were videos, there was a manual, and Marlene Westerveld was available to answer any queries or questions that people had. So that was a really positive experience. The participants also were happy that there was a focus now and a value on personal narratives, and reported that there weren't data available in their countries on personal narratives of either neurotypical children or children with language disorders or dyslexia. So I think people were really pleased that there was a focus on this, and I suppose really saw that it identified a gap or a need. There were also some challenges of being involved in the project. So for example, some participants reported challenges with recruiting participants, particularly when the researchers weren't attached or already have relationships with schools. There was also, some foster parents were reluctant to, for their children, their foster children to participate because maybe these children had experienced trauma. COVID interrupted data collection, and some were considering doing the data collection online, using online platforms. And some countries had experience obtaining ethical approval, but having the project ethically approved in Griffith University in Australia certainly helped in some countries to get ethical approval. The participants also felt that the data from this project also could inform the development of new screening assessment tools. And again, that absence of normative data was discussed. They also talked about, I suppose, the importance of having more representative samples, larger samples, and the importance of including children from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and also the importance of ensuring that the norms generated were robust, that there was reliability, validity, and sensitivity. And the participants were quite excited about the potential for further research opportunities. So for example, the possibility of exploring cross-cultural as well as within cultural similarities and differences. Some felt that the tool could be used with children in clinical populations. And some countries were also interested in more in-depth analysis of semantic and syntactic aspects of language, and there was also potential to include student voice. So what did children think about the protocol? In terms of the experience of translation, in the 9 countries where translation was required, no difficulties were reported. Some people approached translation on the basis of meaning. Others used the process of back translation or checking the translation with others. And 3 participants reported that the children didn't have any difficulty understanding the instructions in the protocol. However, there were some language specific challenges. So, in some countries it was difficult to find the right word or an exact word to translate the words in the probe. So for example, in Brazil, the word annoyed was replaced by angry. In Iceland, children didn't understand what worry meant, so the interviewer had to rephrase the question to enable the children to understand. And in Sweden, the translation of the word excited required further explanation. So the researchers said, how do I translate excited? Because it wasn't quite straightforward. Maybe it kind of was similar to the word happy. So I was thinking a lot about excited and what do we really mean by that? So again, it was just interesting that nuances in terms of, and the complexity of translation. In terms of experiences of transcribing the narratives and analysis, so 9 of the participants reported that they transcribed the narratives manually, and 3 said that it was a time-consuming process. Although a lot of the experience, the researchers had experience in working with narratives, working with personal narratives using this protocol was new for them. Many of the researchers who, in cases where the data were collected by students or by other researchers, they put processes in place to ensure quality control. There were also some challenges in the transcription process. So for example, some countries talked about difficulties transcribing overlapping speech revisions. In Croatia, there were challenges around which of the 3 different dialects would be used. There were also some challenges around coding C units and selecting C units. And, SALT, which was the systematic analysis of language transcripts that was used, wasn't appropriate for some languages, for example, Greek. So the researchers then made adaptations to ensure that they could do analysis that would be comparable for other countries. 2 of the participants said it would be useful to have an automated system that might save time. The analyzing the themes of the story, so what were the stories about and what were children trying to say in their stories? I suppose that was more subjective because it's more qualitative analysis. So some researchers talked about, the need for consistency and maybe further guidance around analyzing the themes, and there may be cultural specific things around the nuance about how to interpret children's stories as well. In terms of experiences generating the data, so again, all of the participants felt that in general, the translated protocol was culturally acceptable, but they were also cognizant that their samples were small and did not reflect the diversity that would be in their respective countries. Some participants, I think it was 4 countries or 3 countries, reported that some of the questions on the demographic questionnaire for parents, so for example, questions about parental level of education and SES, were sensitive and would need to be tweaked. Some participants also said that some of the prompts and wording would need to be tweaked for children. So for example, some children may not have holiday experiences, and there was another question about a school project, and again, not all children may have that experience. So it's being aware of that. In general, the participants felt that all 6 prompts were appropriate and no prompt was deemed to be inappropriate. It was interesting to note that respondents reported that some children provided short responses to the story prompt. So I don't know, I'm not worried about anything. And children needed encouragement and further prompts to generate longer samples. And again, staying within what's recommended in the protocol. The problem prompt was probably seen as the best prompt in terms of generating more data, but at the same time, children needed prompting that it wasn't just about the problem, but also about how the children went about solving the problem. There was also some prompts that maybe were more challenging for children. So for example, responding to a time when they felt proud. And again, some of the participants wondered whether this was a cultural factor in that children may not want to talk about feelings of pride or worry with people that they don't know and may not be used to talk about their feelings in that way. So again, it kind of generated interesting discussions about the prompts and whether it's an individual issue, whether it's a prompt issue, whether it's a cultural issue around what children felt more comfortable maybe talking about. I think there was an expectation, because it was a problem narrative, that children may say more, but in some instances they didn't. So in terms of our discussion and conclusion, so the overall experience of being involved in this international collaboration was seen by the participants as being very positive. The participants also provided really useful recommendations that could strengthen the protocol. So for example, thinking more about samples, sample sizes, representativeness, including clinical populations, and how we might recruit participants for these to take part in this study. They also, the data, I suppose, made us think about data generation, so reflecting on the prompts, the wording in the prompts, in person versus online data collection, and the move now towards more data collection online because of COVID. Tension between consistency and having a protocol that's consistent and comparable, but also having flexibility within specific cultural context. So again, that tension kind of came through. And the data analysis, can we compare, are there methods to compare measures across languages? So I think that came through as well. And I suppose the need for ongoing support and learning together. And this is a complex and a challenging task. So I think there really has been huge learning together. I think this study has also highlighted the importance of understanding the whole process of adapting and implementing a protocol, and the value of qualitative research in helping us to understand people's experiences. And Global Tales continues to develop and evolve, and it really has been a fantastic project for me to be involved in, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Marlene Vesterveld for all her work in leading this project. So thank you very much.